quand on lit ton livre, on voit que tu y dédies une partie pour expliquer le danger d'être bon aux tactiques. Et donc, là, pour expliquer un petit peu, parce que justement, d'apprendre ces tactiques, ça donne beaucoup de force dans les conversations. Mais quels sont pour toi les plus grands risques d'être bon avec l'utilisation des tactiques?
Well, I think one of the big strengths of the tactical approach is that there are very few real risks. You eliminate a lot of the standard risks you have in conversations if you're careful to use the tactical approach properly. So you're one of the biggest risks in general is getting into a fight, and people are angry, people are defensive, or maybe not even knowing how to have a conversation that's productive. When you have a tactical game plan that gives you a grid or a formula, so to speak, of how to do that. And there are 3 steps to the game plan that make it very simple, I think. But I think one of the risks is, and I've had people mention this to me, though it hasn't been my experience, and they said, well, people are going to feel like they are in an interrogation, and I've never had that response from people. Why are you asking me so many questions? I'm not here to answer your questions or something like that. But I think that depends a lot on the attitude or the manner in which I communicate. I am asking genuine questions. Now, sometimes I know the answer to the questions. I'm building a case by asking questions I know the answer to, like I did a moment ago, and I asked the LDS, well, are Muslims Christian? Well, I know they're not, and they know they're not, but I'm just trying to get this fact out in front. So I know the answer to the question, which is really important in one stage of tactics, because you're trying to take them, so you're making a point by using your questions. Other times I'm not clear what the other person means, and so when I'm asking questions, I am genuinely trying to get clarity or help them to have clarity. So when a person says, well, the Bible's been changed, I have a pretty good idea where they're going with that. But I don't think they know anything about it. So I'm asking them so that they can be clear on their own view, that they're not clear on it, basically, because they can't answer that. They don't know how to explain it. Or they'll say, some characterization that's not accurate to the process of textual criticism. So in the way I deliver my questions, I'm not doing an interrogation. That's not my attitude. It's a friendly conversation. And frankly, most people are happy to answer the questions that explain their view. They have their view. They're confronting the Christian sometimes aggressively. Christian's wrong. The atheist, for example, is right. Okay, well, let me ask you some questions. Okay, I'm ready. I'm here. I'm going to tell you why I'm right. So they're generally happy to respond to questions, but I'm always careful to be calm and relaxed and sympathetic. No, what's the right word here? The questions I'm asking are genuine, even though I'm using them for a purpose. I have an agenda, so to speak. Nevertheless, I'm asking proper questions for the conversation. And because my mood or my manner demonstrates that, this is not troublesome. I've never experienced this as being troublesome to people. So that's one liability people have raised that I haven't experienced. And I think if your listeners are using the tactical game plan with the right attitude and in the right way, they're not going to run into that problem. One of the other problems is what happens when someone uses tactics against you, they ask me. Well, in the tactical game plan, I mentioned there are 3 steps. And the first step is just gathering information about somebody's view. So I'm going to ask some form of the question, what do you mean by that? The Bible's been changed? How has it been changed? Now, I'm not asking the question in a wooden way. I don't always use the phrase, what do you mean by that, to everything they say. I find different ways of forming that question, which is important. Okay. And maybe that's another liability. People feel like they always got to say, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Oh, okay. Just be natural in conversation. Okay. But so if somebody asks me that question, well, what do you mean by your view? I have no problem answering that question because I know what I mean.
Yeah.
All right. So I don't care if they ask me that question. That's not a problem. The second question that we use is, how did you come to that conclusion? All right. Or some form of that. So once they explain how the Bible's been changed, I'm going to ask, really, well, how do you know that's actually what took place? All right. So that's a how did you come to that conclusion? What are your reasons for the view? If you're talking to an atheist, so when you say you're an atheist, what does that mean? What kind of atheist are you? Getting detail. All right. Okay. So why do you think atheism is true? It's a simple question. And by the way, there's no pressure on me. I'm just getting that information back. What if somebody asks me, why do I think Christianity is true? So they use the question back on me. I don't have any problem with that. I have reasons for what I believe, and I'm going to answer those questions because I'm able to. All right. It's the third step of Columbo where you're using questions to make a point, and you're asking a couple of questions that lead to a conclusion that can be more troubling for Christians. Because sometimes they'll have an atheist, well, do you think this? Do you think this? Do you think, well, what about this? And then bang, you're stuck. Do you think God is good? Do you think God is powerful? Oh, but wouldn't a good, powerful God want to get rid of evil and be able to get rid of evil? But there's evil in the world, right? So now what? Oh, well, now the Christian has been led down the road. Okay. And now they're stuck. Okay. They may not know how to answer. All right. Now I have an answer, which is really a question. So when you say there are things that are evil in the world, where are you getting your standard to judge those things by? Of course, this is a point that you make as well, and others, but this is a fair question. And that goes to the coherence of the challenge itself. It doesn't answer why a powerful God would allow evil in the world. However, it does raise the question. This isn't even a coherent question coming from you. Okay, so there's a way to manage that, and I wrote a book called Street Smarts, and I'll just hold it up here for people to see it. It is not translated into French yet, but where I go into chapters, unfortunately, yet that you'll have a shot at that, hopefully, John. But where I go into a lot of detail. I have 2 chapters, actually 3 chapters on atheism, and one of those chapters in the problem of evil, and it's titled "Evil: Atheism's Fatal Flaw." That's the title, because the problem of evil works against them. It doesn't work against us. And I'll explain why that's the case. But you get a hint at it with the question I come back with to them. So if you have a sense that people are an atheist, for example, or some objector is stacking up questions to you where you answer them, and now you're going to get like hammered at the end of the series of questions. You can just say, it sounds like you're asking questions to make your point. Why don't you just make your point? Just tell me what you believe and what your issue is or whatever. And so you just step outside of that questioning process. You basically don't let them use the tactic. Just tell me what you believe, and I'll see if I can answer it. If I can't, I can't, but that's all right. And so that's a way to avoid that. Just you don't get into the back and forth thing where they're leading you down the path with their questions, which is an appropriate technique. That's what we teach. But if they use it against you, then that could be harder for you, especially if you're not experienced. Now, people have asked me, well, what if somebody does that to you when you're trying to use the tactical approach? Well, then I lose the tactical advantage. Then I'll just tell them what I think about this, and I'll make my point, and they can respond. So I get the content out there, but I lose a little bit of a tactical edge that makes the content more effective or more persuasive. But those are some of the liabilities, I think, of the tactical approach. They're not big liabilities, though. They're small ones. The advantages are huge.